Wow, that is with commercials. I was like, whoa. Little House on the Prairie was an interesting depiction of the 70s.
Little House on the Prairie was actually set in the 1800s.
Maybe the 1870s. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fallingtower's Watch the First podcast, the podcast in which we watch first episode of a series so that you don't freaking have to.
But you still can.
You thought for a second whether you should say, but you still freaking can.
Yeah, I thought about it.
And today we're doing a review of the first episode of Little House on the Prairie. First episode is entitled Pilot. This was March 29th, 1974. And of course...
credit to Melissa Longo for suggesting it.
Yes. Actually, a few people have, most recently and most notably, Melissa Longo, our good friend. Dr. Muhammad Noor, speaking of good friends, is here. You know him.
Hello. Always a pleasure to be on Fallingtowers. Watch the first of things. Yay.
And you'll be surprised to find out that I am also here. Because if you think about it, anytime I'll ever say that in my life, it'll be true.
That's true. That's a good point. And I'm happy you're here because you're awesome.
Thank you. And a little later on, we'll be interviewing Dr. Noor to get to know a little bit more about him because he's fascinating. You may or may not know. So
there.
We are doing Family Month this month. December is Family Month. Everybody hug your loved ones. If you don't have loved ones, hug strangers. They love that kind of stuff.
Hug yourself.
Hug yourself. And if you'd like us to review a family show, in the comments below, type WTF and the show, but also add parenthetically, please, where we can watch this. So for example, for this one, you would have typed in WTF Little House on That There Prairie, parenthetically, on Amazon Prime, which is where we watched it.
Unfortunately, it does come with commercials, though, so be aware of that.
Yeah, like the olden days, right? Like the 70s. And please, everybody, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel. If you're listening in, give us a 5-star rating, would you? It'd be really nice, and a nice review. We really appreciate it. And now on with the show.
I feel like we're in a predicament about where to go.
Yes, we are. What's next?
I think we have to predict what each other thought about this show after having watched it.
You know?
Normally I say without giving away whether we liked it or not, but I think you know that fact.
Muhammad, I predicted you might say that, actually. So Muhammad and I have known each other pretty well for a few years. We've shared a lot of giggles. We've shared a lot of virtual high fives and thumbs ups. We just flip-flop those. So we like to predict what the other person thought. Now, Dr. Noor, I predict that you have seen this show. I predict that you have not seen this first episode, but that it was on sometimes. Maybe you would visit somebody's house or your aunt's house, and she was watching a show about the olden days. Yeah, in Egypt. She was like, what were they doing in the olden days in the Midwest in America? And I predict that you're certainly aware of it. You're probably aware of maybe an actor or two that were in it, and you're aware of the story, and I feel like you may have seen it on before or nothing. And I predict that you enjoyed this show. I predict that you were like, it was chill. It was kind of fun. It was kind of interesting. I got a lot more predictions for you that I'm going to save. So, Muhammad, what do you think?
So, Ryan, I'm sure you were aware of this show. I'm sure you knew of its existence. I'm sure you knew the plot in the sense that this was sort of an old-timey show about a family. I'm sure you knew that much. I don't know if you've actually, you may not. I'll just guess. I'll guess maybe you haven't actually watched it. Maybe you hadn't actually seen it. And maybe, like you said, it may have been on in somebody else's house. But I don't know if you ever sat down yourself and said, like, I'm going to watch an episode of Little House on the Prairie, even as a young tyke. You may have just been like, nah, I'm going to move it over. I'm going to watch He-Man instead. Yeah, I like that look. You're like, that was a no-brainer.
Yeah, I
But
did
yeah,
like He-Man.
in terms of this particular episode, I think you're gonna well, A, I think you're gonna think it was really long. And B, I think you're gonna be like, yeah, it was okay. Because I mean, what you like is you like a good setup, and you like it when a show is going to tell you what it's about. And I think you're not going to like that the show basically completely resets itself at the end of the pilot episode.
Interesting theories, Dr. Noor.
Hmm.
So everybody in the live chat now, this is going to be an easy one. There are only two of us today. We're keeping it simple for you. No crazy guesswork. You
Yeah,
know
yes.
me.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, you know me. You know Muhammad. Do you think I liked this show? Do you think Muhammad liked this show? Make your predictions. Take your time. Get in detail. Really dig around in there. War Dog Heim loves this show, and he hopes that he's going to predict that we liked it because he likes this show, and he's going to be like, these guys are going to find the good in this show. So make your predictions in the live chat or in the comments below.
And I predicted Glenn Iverson did not finish watching it because he didn't know how long it was. He started and it didn't finish in time for him to watch our show.
Very good. While you're making your predictions, everybody, Dr. Noor is going to buy us all a little bit of time by telling us what this show is even about.
I'll do my best. Set in the 1860s, the Ingalls family, dad, mom, 3 girls, and dog, sets off in a wagon from Wisconsin to rural Kansas to find a less crowded place to hunt, farm, and live. They build a house in the middle of nowhere, seemingly with only one neighbor quite far away. Various small adventures are depicted in the roughly 1 year that the episode follows, including encounters with wolves, encounters with local Native Americans, a blizzard over Christmas, a fire, and more. Sadly, though, the episode ends with Charles Ingalls being told that a Kansas tribe has petitioned Washington for their land. Now they have to move. So basically, everything resets at the end of the episode.
Interesting. Interesting. So, unlike whatever his name was, Captain Ingalls, I have no idea where to go now.
Oh, I have a good idea. I suggest this is the place where we have some expectation, not punching Ryan, where we spend a little bit of time what we expected before having seen this particular episode of this particular show. And note, again, we're focusing on the episode, not the whole series. And a lot more time on what we actually get in with this show. I should actually punch the camera once on purpose because everybody keeps predicting that.
You know, actually yesterday I was like, how does Muhammad do that? Does he? And I was like testing, I'm like, well, you just got to really come in close, you know.
Yep.
So I practiced.
Or, as Ryan likes to say more eloquently, we like to compare and contrast what we expected before watching the show with what we actually got after having watched the show.
I do love to say that. Sometimes I say it.
Well.
Sometimes I say it enough times to put myself to sleep. You know, when you can't sleep, I just go, I like to compare and contrast what we expected versus what. See, it works. It works. So, Muhammad, get us started here and tell us, before you watched this first episode of Little House on the Prairie, episode 1, entitled Pilot, what did you expect?
Oh, I'd seen the show a ton. Not this particular episode. I don't know that I've ever actually seen this episode. So Ryan was correct about that. I don't know if I've ever seen the pilot, but I've definitely seen the series, like episodes in the series, a lot. Like, and to the extent that I can actually recall the plots of many individual episodes from it. Julie, my wife, and I were actually like walking the night before I was watching this, and we were just thinking of all the ones that I could recall. And I came up with a lot. She came up with some others too. Some of them were actually converged, and some of them were ones that like one of us remembered, but the other did not. We never watched it together, but yeah, no, I knew the show. I enjoyed it. I remember it was very different later on when like they adopted a boy, and then way later in the series there were a bunch of other kids which I never quite understood where they came from. But yeah, well, actually, I'll stop there because I don't want to give away anything about this particular episode in terms of as the contrast for it. But yeah, I'm very familiar with all the cast who we saw in this episode. Though I'd forgotten the dog.
You forgot the poor dog. I have some thoughts on that dog, by the way. But let me tell y'all what I expected. Okay. I had not seen this, but I was aware of this, as Muhammad said, um, because I feel like everybody's heard the title Little House on the Prairie. The
Mhm.
title itself is practically a joke. It sounds silly. Little House on the Prairie. Or it just feels like it feels like something that everybody's done a spoof of or everybody's
Mhm.
aware of, or it just sounds like the thing that you want to make fun of. No offense. It just sounds like that. What I thought it was, without giving it much thought, if you had asked me before I watched the show, what's the show about? I would have said, that's about like, a family, in a house in the 50s or
Oh,
60s. Like,
1950s.
yes. Like I just thought it was a little house on the prairie. I thought that whenever the show aired was in that time. So I
Mhm.
just thought it was like a little house on the prairie, and like the Brady Bunch. They're just, but on the
Mhm.
prairie
Mhm.
or whatever. So, but I didn't really give it that much thought, but that was just kind of the impression I
Mhm.
got. Whether that's what it was, we'll tell you in a moment with what we
Mhm.
actually got. Dr. Nor, oh, everybody pencils down. No more predictions. Hopefully, you've already written those down. Dr. Nor, what did you actually get upon viewing this first episode?
I was very surprised because this is not the show that I felt like I remembered or watched or anything like that at all. Um, yeah, I mean, I remember when the show first started and they were over in Wisconsin or something like that. I was like, okay, I don't remember this starting someplace in Wisconsin. They were moving someplace. And it was a long time of travel, and I kept on just kind of laughing, thinking like, "Oh, poor Ryan. He's probably like, what am I watching this whole time as it's going?" And there was just more like travel and travel and travel. Like, this is not the show I remember at all. And I don't know if I'm misremembering. I definitely remember it having like very episodic plots. I remember them living just outside this town called Walnut Grove, and I remember the people who lived in Walnut Grove, like that nasty Nellie Olson girl who would pick on Laura Ingalls. Like I remember all these things, and none of that was in this pilot episode. And even when they built the house, I was like, "That's not the house they lived in." You can see it behind both me and behind Ryan. That's the house they lived in like the series. That little one when they built it, like, does this become like the outhouse, or did they build it up, or what? What is this? More specifically on it, the acting was good. Actually, I was actually, although I didn't like her character, I thought she was very Caroline was very compelling. That it felt very convincing to me in that sense. I do remember that this show had very religious undertones many times. Like God, there's one episode where Albert gets sick, and I almost said Michael. That's the actor's name. And Charles builds this giant altar with stones and puts a cross on top of it, and then lightning hits the cross and it reverberates down and it comes into Albert and heals him. Like, okay, it gets
Whoa, dude.
it gets out there sometimes. It was good at establishing personalities, but it felt much more like a prequel than a pilot. It felt like this is the pre Little House on the Prairie, and then like now you're going to see the actual series later on. Um, it is, I mean, based on, I mean, this was, if I remember correctly, this is something that Laura Ingalls Wilder, the actual person, so she eventually married somebody whose last name is Wilder, um, in the series too, as well as in real life. But this is essentially like biographical of her life, and it felt like that. It felt like it felt like taking a year of anybody's life is not actually that interesting, and that's what this episode was. I mean, yeah, there were interesting moments, but there wasn't like a clear theme aside from just where they were living. So I was very surprised. Like this is not the show I remembered at all. So I'll stop there and let Ryan go in.
It's very interesting. There's so many interesting things that I'd like to poke and prod there. Well, I'll tell you what I got. First, I got sad when I saw it was 97 minutes. Muhammad is correct there. I was like, 97 minutes.
I'm sorry. I should have looked.
Wow, that is with commercials. I was like, whoa, nurse, hold all my calls. Or how does it go? I don't know. But so anyway, so there was that. And then when it started, I was like, this feels like it's maybe not the 70s. Feels like maybe this is the 18, because they were like, in a cabin, and then they went on like, and then it was the clothes that they were wearing. I'm like, that's not hippie clothes. That's like hippie people making clothes from 100 years prior. So I got it pretty much immediately. It makes it very clear they're wearing like puritanical clothes, and so so I actually got much more interested then, because I was like, whoa, 1870s is way more interesting than 1970s. So then I was like, okay, this is cool, because I like historical things. I'm not interested in a 1960s period piece or 70. I mean, sometimes it could be cool if it's like stylized and it really just shows you the style and the songs of those eras, but I don't usually care about things of the mobster movies of the 20s or, once you start getting into the 1800s or the 1500s or anything like that that takes you away to a completely different time and a foreign place. And by foreign, I just mean foreign to my knowledge, feels foreign. So that's, then it felt like, oh, I'm gonna watch a story straight out of my history books, straight out of my third grade history book, right? And so that's what I got. And okay, let's just get into this here, though. When there are a lot of baffling things. And by the way, Mohammed, you mentioned it felt like a prequel. I believe it is. I believe this is episode 0. It's not technically episode 1. It's like a pilot movie, and then there's an episode 1. And now, after having seen that full episode, for me, I'm like, oh, it's very clear why that is. That ending actually surprised me quite a bit. But the things that were baffling was the script. I was like, this is not, forgive me, but this is not a good script. Like, at least as I understand current screenwriting, where you have certain formulae that you like to follow. And, there are some things that they followed, but there are other things like, why are they showing this? And why are they showing that? And why are they doing this? And what's that? And like,
it could have easily been half the length. Easily. It could have been half the length and it would have been fine.
Yeah. But the most baffling, the first very baffling thing that hit me was, why are they so mean to the dog? Like, they're like, okay, bye family, hugs and kisses, see ya. And they're like, and Jack is the best dog ever. And then they leave without the dog, just assuming the dog will just follow. Why don't you let the dog in the freaking wagon? First of all, let him in the wagon, right? You love him, let him in the wagon. Secondly, how do you know he's going to follow? How do you know he's not going to take a pee or something? Or he's
it's not like they were checking on him either, too. Yeah. They were just gone.
Or he's used to you coming back. You go to town to buy some nails. You come back. How's he? That was ridiculous. And then at least put him in the wagon when you're crossing the river. Oh, Jack the dog, we're going to cross the river. Hop in so you don't die. And then they don't even like check on him. They don't care. He presumably drowns. I mean, it was the weirdest, most baffling thing. And that's when I realized that, yes, this was probably, like Muhammad said, this was biographical. That's probably how it happened. That's probably how people treated animals in the 1800s, or their dogs.
The Ingalls family.
or they might have just been ignorant. They just don't know. They're just like, oh, dogs, they like to swim. They do that. They just kind of treated them like part of the farm, whereas nowadays we'd just be like, just put the dog in the. So that's when I realized, wow, we are really being transported to a different time. We're going to be going for realism more than we're going to be going for good storytelling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was my impression exactly. That I think it was very much I mean, I have not read the books, but my guess is it was probably very closely following the book, just especially given how much time it was just moving and like, oh, and now there's a fire, and now there's
Oregon
this like,
Trail, yeah.
yeah, right. Oregon Trail is a perfect analogy for it. And like the treatment of the Native Americans was terrible, but it's probably actually what happened in the sense. And I liked how remember Laura Ingalls Wilder is the one who wrote it. I liked how she was the person who was sticking up for them. So
It was very clear she was the main character, and she was the point of view of this. Well, she wasn't. It feels like the dad was kind of the main character,
he's probably
but
one on the call sheet. But yeah,
but Laura was the POV, which
exactly.
is so.
Exactly.
So, for example, if there was ever an episode without one of them, it would be without the dad. There would not be an episode without the daughter. So even though he had the most screen time and he kind of controlled the direction of the story, which would make him the main character.
Yeah.
In a strange way, she was kind of the main character because we're almost watching the show through her eyes. It's
exactly. It's her reminiscences of him. And if she could show what she was doing, it's not that interesting. I was like, now I'm playing with my dolls again. I'm chasing a butterfly or chasing, what are those names of those weird birds that they talked about? The dickcissels. I had to look that up. Is that really the name of a bird? It actually is the name of a bird.
I was very
It's
happy
also an
to
Urban
hear
Dictionary
that.
too, but that's a different
Oh
thing.
dear. That's a different thing. And then you even imagine like, well, what about the things that what's the dad's name? Charles. What he did on his own. You see him going on his own and running into some wolves. I thought they were dogs, wild dogs. So that would necessarily maybe make him the main character. But no, remember, he ends up telling Laura that. And so the reason we know that happened is because he told her that. So so this is all still fully her recollection and nothing added as far as we know.
And we saw nothing about what happened in Independence. I mean, he went to Independence for a week. We heard nothing about it. Like,
very true.
Okay, what happened there?
No, you're right. And then we just waited with them. We were with the girls, and I was also immediately like, "Whoa, there's no boys." Like three girls. I was like, "Oh, is the baby a boy?" I was like, "Oh man, that's going to be a rough life. A dude trying to take care of four girls." And that's why I was this is going to be the biggest theme for me. I was so happy to see the mom kicking ass and him not being like, I mean, he gave one line of like, well, you shouldn't be whatever. But no, man, if it's a dude and his wife and three girls, the wife is going to be lifting logs. The girls are going to be shoveling water or scooping up water. And those were my favorite parts. You know, when there's a fire and the girls are running into the river and scooping up water and running back. I was like, they were killing it because they were moving. They were going back and forth and she was lifting. And the actress, for me, the best part of the movie was the actress, the mom.
Caroline. I agree.
She was the best. She was easily the best actor in the bunch. Possibly the neighbor guy, but
Mr. Edwards,
because she could convey so much emotion, but she was also very funny. Like when she saw the guy spitting and you see her face and she's got like disgust and horror. She was a very funny, very comedic actress in those moments.
Totally. I had several ha-ha moments from her, like, I'll be friendly, but my heart won't be in it. Or one good whiff of Mr. Edwards would drive anyone off.
Yes.
Like, there were several good lines for her, yeah.
When Mr. Edwards says something about up Chuck and then spits, the look on her face was worth the 97 minutes.
Agreed.
So good.
She's the best for sure. The girls end up being quite good too, especially as they get a little bit older. I mean, right now they're very young, but the series goes for like 9 or 10 seasons, so they get quite a bit older. And you know, Laura gets married, Mary goes blind. I think there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. Things go
one's
down.
Mary?
The older daughter.
Wow, she goes blind, huh?
Yeah, she had very few lines in this episode. I thought that was kind of interesting. Like she spoke, but like barely. I mean, she spoke about as much as the littlest girl spoke.
That also made it clear, especially where the point of view was, because it was really that girl was the superstar, where she was the one. She was Daddy's special secret friend. You know, he's like, well, I can't confide in my wife, but I can confide in my middle child. What? Come on. Not even your oldest? Not even the baby that can't talk back? You choose the middle child? That was weird, but
Yeah. Yeah. It was, yeah. Again, I did kind of enjoy it. It definitely felt long. I mean, it felt not only just from the length, I just meant like it felt like just watching somebody's house, you know,
yes.
like a lot of it. Or okay, you know, I mean, I could watch my neighbors right now, and it'd be interesting for a few minutes, but then, you know, I was struggling a little bit by the end. But given I know the characters, it was interesting seeing this sort of prequel to them and saying like, oh, okay, this is how this all began. So that's why I was always feeling bad for you, Ryan, because I was thinking like, oh, you're probably not even gonna know these people. You're gonna be like, what is this?
You know, I was very just in that world. I thought it did a
Okay,
very good job, as far as I know, because I don't
yeah,
remember the 1870s. As far as I know, I was very young. I have no recollection. As far as I know, that was it felt like an accurate depiction of what life was like. And it was very eye opening. It was very like, wow, you had to be good at a lot of things. And it was a very no excuse life back
yeah,
then. It
yeah.
was
Stakes
like,
were high.
it was like you got to build a house. And if all that you are is a husband and a wife, then the husband and the wife have to build a house together. And if all you have is three girls, then the three girls are going to have to babysit themselves, even though they're young. Just, don't die. Don't die in the river or with
Don't
wolves,
poke the
because
rattlesnakes. Don't.
yeah, because we're busy building a house so that we don't all die together. It was very eye
Yeah,
opening in
high
that. Yeah,
stakes.
and they had to. I couldn't just go and build a house right now. I mean,
No.
okay, let me correct that. I could, but it definitely would not look like that. I would
so
do it, but
So, question for you about the house. So, they stopped at one point in time, and Charles went over that hill and he called out their house, and they came and looked. And it was just like not long, grassy field. Like, okay, we're going to build a house down there. Where did all that wood come from? Like, I didn't see a tree in sight when they stopped there. Like, okay, are they hauling it from like way like back to this spot here? That seemed very like, wouldn't you play a
yeah,
place closer to some woods so you could do this instead of
yeah.
just in the middle of this just prairie?
They clearly found a place that was close to a stream,
Yeah. Yeah.
although we
Yeah.
didn't
Because they
see
put
that.
Carrie in it. No, they put Carrie. Well, it was mixed because they put Carrie in it during the fire. So there
Right.
was
So it
also this
must have
thing
been
about
very
how,
close.
yeah, but they also, you remember earlier there was a comment where he said, well, you could be like the Native Americans and go watch it way over in the stream, like as though it was really far
That's
away.
true. Have some consistency, guys. Is it
Yeah.
far, or can a 6-year-old go toss a toddler in it real quick? You know? Yeah, so that was a little inconsistent. But yeah, I didn't see any trees. I don't know where that came from. But I thought what I was looking at was the house that they built was the little house on the prairie. And I was like, oh, that is a very little house. And then I started
Very little.
picturing, wow, an entire series is going to take place in this. I'm like, no wonder they call it the little house. That's so cute because it's this tiny little house. How are they going to survive? There's all these crazy elements. There's all these crazy things going on. And there's just two adults and three little girls in this tiny little house. It's like, boy, that's up. And then at the end, they left. I was like, wait, what? That's not even the little house. But then I realized, what it probably means is if this was the original thing, this was, or the one that we saw, that
Yeah.
was the little house on the prairie.
Yeah.
So forever, all those seasons, people were attributing the little house on the prairie to the house they lived in, but it wasn't. It's just the show that
Yeah.
was kicked off from the little house that they built initially, which
Yeah.
is
I think
very
you're right.
confusing, right?
I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah. It was interesting too, this thought of like, we're just going to stop here and live here and, and just on our, basically kind of on our own. Cause I mean, they eventually discovered there was a Mr. Edwards around, but in theory, there could have not been. And they were just going to live off the land. But the mom was saying all this stuff about how, well, Mary wants to be a teacher. She wants to go to school. He's like, well, worry about that later. I'm like, dude, why did you build the house here? This is are you going to go build another house? Apparently now they are. But that was interesting. And then they were like, well, we want to go to church. Well, we'll worry about that later. Like, okay, like, are you waiting for a church to come to you, or what's? I never quite understood what the. It was almost like everybody was just kind of following Charles's lead, and for
Totally.
Caroline's, it's like we're just gonna put off your things and hope that you forget about these issues, and even then, like eventually, what's gonna happen? Like, okay, Laura's gonna grow up, and Mary's gonna grow up, and are they just gonna like wander off and try to find partners somewhere?
Yeah. And the screenwriting aspect of it, I just thought, and again, we've established that this is just somebody's recollection,
Yeah.
more so than a writer's embellishment to make it a good story. Because, like, why are you showing all of these great advancements where it's like, okay, now they've got a foal. Okay, now they have a cow and a calf. Now he's got a plow. They're building all these things. They giggle when the girl runs to the outhouse. Like they build a home.
I didn't get that part. I remember seeing that. I was like, why are they laughing? I assume she goes there all the time.
Yeah. And so they build this home. They keep building up, and they're establishing this, and they're gaining that, and you're like, wow, they did all this, and finally it's like they have a nice little community kind of area, and then they leave it. And I did not believe they were going to leave it, because a normal script would not do that. They wouldn't spend an hour and a half building, and then the end is like, okay, bye. You're like, well, then what was the
wrap it, start over?
Yeah, what was the point? So I kept thinking that the Edwards was going to convince them to stay. Something he's going to say, or that the Native Americans were going to come by and say, you don't have to leave, we like you. Or that, and then that didn't happen, and that didn't happen. So I was like, my last resort is, oh, the little girl's going to say, I don't want to leave. And I kept thinking, because in any script, that's going to happen. They're going to stay there. And then that kicks off the series. You know what? Yeah. We love this little house on the prairie too much, so we're not going. But it never happened. They just left. I was so baffled.
Yeah. Actually, interesting thing. I'm curious, what did you think of the dynamics between Charles and Caroline? Because it seemed like what would happen is, like, they get fussy, and then all of a sudden they just kind of smile, and it was all better again. Like, what? That happened a few times in the episode. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, interesting. Yeah. I wonder if it's just, again, a kid's recollection of their parents.
Well, Dr. Noor, you see, that is the power of Jesus. Jesus comes
that would be what the show would say, totally. That's totally what the show would say.
I was like, I wonder if that's what they're trying to apply, where they're like, yeah, dude, how do you not get tired of somebody when it's just the two of you and your kids in a 10 by 10 dark, smoky, stinky, probably home? I'd be like, man, I'm getting real tired.
I built another house next door. I'm going over there.
An extension, grow that out. But yeah, so
that's the other thing too, is the kids are sleeping in the same room with them, like, apparently forever would be the plan if this was the house they were going to stay in. I knew that wasn't, because I remember what their room was like in the other thing. But
yeah, and then I was like, okay, so the two older girls have to sleep together in a bed, but the baby gets its own bed.
Yeah, that was interesting. Maybe the baby wets her bed enough that they're so like, please don't make us do that.
Oh yeah, maybe it's the baby farts in bed a lot. Or something.
I was thinking worse than farts.
So here's the thing, though. Throughout the whole nitpicking, and throughout the whole this doesn't make any sense, and throughout all of the screenwriters wouldn't write this. This doesn't make any sense. That doesn't work. That's not normal. Somehow in there, apparently, I got attached. And
great.
When at the very end, towards the very end, when the fire happened, I was worried for the house. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, don't. I was almost like, I'm way too invested. You've spent 90 minutes on this. Don't kill the house. Like, this is, and so I was worried. I actually felt worried. Mm-hmm. And when they left the house at the end, I felt sadness. I felt something. I was like, and I did not think I would feel anything like that. I thought I would feel annoyance. Yeah. So somehow, somewhere along the line, I got attached to that family and that house and that story, even though the dad's kind of shady. He's kind of a dick.
So Mr. Edwards is still in the series after this, which I don't understand how that works. I guess he moves too. He follows. I don't know how that happens, but I know he's in it. But what's interesting, I don't know if you remember the series Highway to Heaven. It was Michael Landon. Same actor, and the Mr. Edwards was the number 2 on that one.
Really?
Right, yeah.
Well, I think Michael Landon directed this, right? So I
Yeah,
think it's a
he
he.
probably did Highway to Heaven too, which also was a very religious show. Though I actually thought Michael Landon was Jewish, though. It's kind of funny. There's all these Jesus things in this out, but whatever.
Yeah, I never realized. So funny. Highway to Heaven. Never for a second actually made the connection that it must be religious. I just thought it was
Yeah.
like a race car show or something. Like, I swear, you only when you said it's religious, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I never saw it. But I just remember hearing the name Highway to Heaven. I just thought it was like a car
Mhm.
show about cars or something.
Yeah, that's great. I did look up about the what was the name of the Osage, the Osage Native Americans, and like, do they
Yeah.
actually speak French? And apparently there were some who did, at
Well,
least
it must
according to
have been,
Google.
yeah, the Louisiana Purchase is in that area, right? So I don't really remember exactly the history of when the Louisiana Purchase happened, but you have to assume that that entire area was that was the French area. So they were talking with the natives, and I had heard of the Osage,
Okay.
um, and I did understand the French that they were speaking.
Good. I was about to ask you that.
Yeah, I definitely did. It was very bad French, but like with anybody, but that made it more realistic. I mean,
Right?
geez, Native Americans, they don't talk French very often, I would think, or to anybody very often. So, and one of the Native Americans looked like actual Indian, like from
Did look like
India,
that.
Indian.
Oh, like from India. Oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like actual Indian, one of them looked
no.
or thereabouts. But anyway, let's move on, shall we? Because there's a lot to talk about with this, but we can't talk about Dick Sissies forever. Dick Sissles, Dick Sissles.
I did actually look up. Like, I hope that's a real bird.
Yeah, especially that those little foul-mouthed girls were talking about Dick Sissles.
Well, what happened is apparently it makes a sound that sounds like it. And I was listening as they saw those birds, and there was a sound that sounded like the bird sound that sounded like that. So I'm like,
Sounds like a
that must
dick.
be they must have actually gotten Dick Sissel bird sound recordings and played them.
What do they sound like?
Like Dick Sissel. Like that. It's like
Okay, I've got to look this up. Everybody at home, look up the sound that Dick Sissles make. I thought they'd be like, me, me, me. And they're like, ah, you're a Dick Sissel or something. I don't know. Anyway, so let's move forward. Dr. Muhammad Noor, let's talk about you at this moment. It is time to do that. And I look forward to this every moment of my life because you're a really cool
no.
guy. But what I like about you, Dr. Noor, one of your greatest attributes is not just that you can make science fun, but you can dumb it down to the right level, which is not very much. Don't, you know what I mean? Like, trust your audience, right? And some people might talk. Sometimes people try to explain things and you're like, bro, I don't understand a word you're freaking saying. And other people try to dumb it down where you're like, look, I'm not a 6-year-old. Trust your audience. Say it clearly and intelligently in a way that people can understand. And I want to know, I mean, because you do that so well, I want to know if that's something that you deliberately learned how to do, or if it's just kind of a natural thing that kind of came out over time.
Generally speaking, I feel like most of the time when a scientist talks about something that they know really well, that's actually when they do it worse.
Yes.
If it's something they don't know that well. Because often, I remember this from my intro. So I've taught an introductory class at Duke University. I haven't very recently, but in the past I used to teach it quite regularly. It's called Introduction to Genetics and Evolution. If you're interested, actually, there's a version of it on Coursera. So any of you here watching this video can watch it for free on Coursera. It's just free online. And it's the full Duke University Introduction to Genetics and Evolution course. For that class, for example, there was this on a field called phylogenetics. So it's basically trying to figure out the evolutionary relationships of various species. That is something I did not know very well at all. But frequently people have told me that's the clearest set of your lectures because I'm basically with you. I'm learning it just like a student, and I'm telling you things as I'm learning. I'm like, oh, look, this is kind of cool. I just figured this out. And you would have just figured it out too, because you would have just learned it at the same moment. So generally speaking, that seems to be no, it's interesting the way I'm saying it makes it sound like we should just never get experts to talk about their fields. That's probably overstating, because what will happen is people start asking more and more in-depth questions as they get excited about it, and that's where you need the experts. But really, in terms of the introductory level things, I feel like in theory anybody could do it. just with, a little bit of practice along those lines. So I
Hmm.
feel like that mentioned I've been successful. I think it's because often I don't know that much. So I'm trying to figure it out.
Well, here's the juicy secret, Mohammed, is I feel like I'm getting a free history or a free science lesson every time I talk with you. The history lesson was this show. The science lesson is with you. I feel like I'm getting something that I should charge for. So that makes me feel very lucky every time I talk to you, because a lot of
You're kind.
times I'll start to say something, in the realm of science, and I've got a fairly decent grasp of rudimentary science. But
You're
what's
very
great
good.
about, well, thank you. What's great about you is even if I'm not really making it clear what I'm talking about, you can understand what I'm trying to get at. You know
Mhm,
the points in the subject matter that I'm trying to hit, and you can
mhm.
run with it. But I want to know, because this is very interesting to me, when did your interest in science hit?
Oh, I've always been interested in science. I mean, I don't even remember a time as a kid before I was interested in science. I mean, both my parents were trained as engineers, so they always very much encouraged science. My father worked at NASA Langley Research Center, and we bring back like these books. Like I
Wow.
remember one I still have actually. It's at their house still. It's called On Mars. And this was right after the Viking missions, and it had all these pictures from the Viking missions. And this was late 1970s, so this was shocking. Like these are photographs from on the surface of another planet, and having that book just sitting there, like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So I always love things like that in terms of biology. I mean, I'd always go outside and catch like June bugs and things like that and look at them and put them on ice so they'd stop moving and I could manipulate them and do things with them. And then, let them warm up and they'd fly away. So, no, I've always loved science. But I mean, back to your point about explaining things. I mean, the best thing, if anybody wants to try to explain something, the best thing you can always do is try to be as empathic as possible. Try to feel what the other person, try to pick up on their little subtle, facial hints, things like that. Try, if somebody's explaining something to you, interpolate and think, like, don't just think like what is the right answer, think what are they trying to say, and then work from there. And that's usually the best approach for those sorts of things.
Mhm. Which field of science do you have the least interest in,
I have the
or that
least
doesn't work with
interest
you?
in. Oh, interesting.
Because for me,
Yeah.
just for my own self, like as a kid, I was very interested in science, and I thought, when you're 6 years old, you think, "Ooh, a scientist is somebody that mixes, you know, the liquids and
Yeah.
makes it, boy, and they come up with
Yeah.
crazy, alchemy and stuff." And so I thought that was really cool. And then I learned about biology and physiology and the natural sciences and all this. And I was like, I can't wait to learn chemistry because that's what this stuff is. And I was terrible at chemistry. It didn't work with my brain. Everything else did. I was
Oh.
great at math. I was great at science. For some reason, chemistry, and I hated it. I ended up hating it. I'm like, I don't like it at all. So I wonder,
I
is there,
wonder I wonder how much of that's the teacher, because I feel like a lot of introductory courses, especially in biology and in chemistry, a lot of them focus way too much on just
I didn't like the
memorizing.
teacher. No, I did not.
Right? A lot of them just focus way too much on memorizing. And sometimes it's not necessarily the teacher's fault. Sometimes it's like there's a set of standards that are approved by the city or state or whatever that you have to teach them this. But it's just like this memorizing a bunch of stuff. And that's not science isn't about memorization. People often say, oh, your scientist must be really smart. Like, no, science is about trying to figure things
Yep.
out. It's not about just memorizing a lot. And it's always sad when people do that. For me personally, I don't know. I don't know. I can name a field of science that I like dislike. But I'll tell you when I struggled with a lot. And I even had a really good teacher I struggled with a lot. And that was in college, the second semester of introductory physics.
I knew it was
As
going to be
it got to,
physics. I
oh yeah,
knew
as
it.
soon as I got to electricity and magnetism, I was like, I remember they kept on talking about they were doing something like this all the time, and I never quite understood what that was for magnetism. I struggled with that. So fortunately, I only had to take 1 year of physics. So once it got to the really tough part, and I got at least a passing grade, I was like, done. And it wasn't that it wasn't interesting. I actually thought it was quite interesting. I couldn't grasp it, even though I had a
Hmm.
really good teacher. I couldn't grasp it well, so I
Hmm.
struggled with it.
Sometimes it just depends on how our brains work.
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah.
our brains just like my brain didn't work with chemistry, and I
Mhm.
could blame the teacher, but it's probably me. But
Oh
anyway,
no.
so everybody, Muhammad teaches at Duke University. He's a vice provost for academic affairs, along with also being a professor. He does so many things. That's why he's so freaking busy I don't know how you do it. He's actually 26 years old, but this kind of stuff ages
Most
you.
gray.
Yeah, it's tough. Anyway, check him
Also,
out.
science consultant for Star Trek too. Sometimes
That's the big one. That's
that's the
where we're
background.
going. Everybody, by the way, Star Trek was like, okay, this guy's the best professor. He's the greatest scientific mind of our generation. Will you please be a science consultant? And you said at first no, right? The first couple times.
Absolutely not what happened. No, I actually really, really appreciate it. Michelle Paradise was the one who actually first brought me on. This was for Star Trek Discovery. Wonderful working with her, and I so appreciate it. It's like it's an honor and a privilege to get to work with her and all the team. Yeah, a bunch of brilliant people there on behind the scenes, as well as of course in front of the camera.
And that is of Star Trek Discovery. But you've also lent your mind to other shows as well. I don't know if you could talk about any of those.
Yeah, a little bit The Prodigy, a little bit Strange New Worlds, but mostly things that haven't come out yet, so we can't talk about those yet.
All right, but we will in the future. And speaking of the future, let's move forward to the terrible twos.
Bottom line.
It's the final two questions of the show, the two most important questions regarding this. The most important questions were the ones we asked Muhammad, of course, because inquiring minds wanted to know. Question number one is, Dr. Noor, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give this long-ass, boring-ass show?
I give it a 10. No, I would not. Just for this episode, not for the series. Again, I love the series. And again, I could tell you all sorts of episodes, like the time when Nellie Olson pretended like her legs were broken until Laura pushed her into the creek and she came running out. Like I remember so much about this series. Weird. Yeah, right. This particular episode, I give it a 6. That, you know, I enjoyed it because of the characters that were there, and it was fun seeing them again because it's been such a long time since I've seen them. I did like, as you mentioned, the historical parts were kind of interesting there too. It was long and it was slow though, so that was a struggle. And I was kind of confused through the whole thing. Like, where's Walnut Grove? Where's their house? Like, are they going to build up this house? Is Independence really Walnut Grove? What? So there was a lot of confusion in there.
It was like a sci-fi show where you're like, it's really Walnut Grove. It's this different.
Or I thought maybe the city builds up around them later. Maybe they were first and then the city came in later or something like that.
Yeah, I had a lot of questions about that as well. But for me, so I'm watching this thing. I'm watching this terrible show, or, you know, what I wanted to be terrible. And I kept thumbing my nose at it and scoffing and being like, ugh. Well, this isn't a screenplay. This isn't a real script. What is this? What is that? Oh, why is the director picking what? And then at the end, I was like, no, don't burn down house. Don't burn. They're leaving the house. What? And I've like felt something. I was like, I mean, I guess then if that's the case, mission accomplished, right? And for me, the real mission for me was when I saw when it took place, was I wanted to be taken to that time. I didn't want it to feel like it was obviously a set or it was obviously, you know, a certain place. I felt like I was there for the most part. Mm-hmm. And that's what I wanted. I want you to take me away and drop me down into a place that I have never seen and never will see because it's so far in the past. And it did that. And it made me feel something at the end. So shockingly, I'm giving it an 8.1. I tried to talk myself out of it last night. I was like, okay, wow, that's an 8.1. I'm like, what are you doing, Ryan? You're going to embarrass yourself. All your friends are going to laugh at you for giving it an 8.1. But when I tried to talk myself into a 6, I was like, no, it doesn't feel like a 6 to me. It doesn't feel like a 7. It feels like an 8.1. I couldn't talk myself out of it, and believe me, I tried. However,
actually, can I ask you a quick question? You mentioned something about the setting too there. Obviously, like the point where he was riding the horse, that was very clearly a green screen. But generally speaking, where do you think this was filmed? Like it looked like it was just filmed in some place like that, right? I mean, did you get a sense that this was on some lot somewhere, or where do you think this was done?
To be honest, I was so comfortable just immersing myself in it that I didn't use the critical eye of trying to figure out where this was or where that was, which I normally do. I was mostly impressed with how the realism of what the branches look like, and the fact that this lady who's her job is an actress, she's an actress, yet they're like, okay, I know you're an actress, but this 40-pound log, we need you to carry it over here. And okay, little girl, I know you're a 9-year-old actress, but you need to carry this 30-pound dog over to the other. They were just making people do stunts. They were, they were, and I don't think she's a stunt woman, but so I was just mostly impressed with the fact that they were just like, hey, if you want to work this job, you got to earn your keep, kind of like how people did back then. So I was mostly just kind of lost in that. I know that's a long way to answer your question, but I was just kind of more impressed with the people doing the show, the actors and the set designers that were actually building things made out of these logs. It looked very real, it seemed very authentic. So that's question number one, everybody. Question number two is the big one. It's for the purposes of this podcast, we all had to watch the first episode of Little House on the Prairie. Aw, that little rascal. But now that the podcast is over and we're free to move about the internet, Dr. Muhammad Noor, would you of your own volition watch the second episode?
I've been debating this one since I watched the show yesterday. I think I'm going to land on yes, but it was a hard decision. Like, again, to be clear, it's just based on this pilot episode. It's not based on what I know about the rest of the series. I think I'm going to land on yes, but it was a struggle on that. Because imagine if I didn't know everything about the rest of the series and I saw this and I thought, is every episode just going to reset at the end? I would hate that. Like, I would never want to see that again. Like, I would watch the second, I'd be done forever after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did have a lot of questions, and now that I know that you've seen this, I want to ask you these questions.
Sure.
Because, I did find myself, that was the one thing where I kind of would let myself picture outside of the real world or outside of their world, where I would picture how are they going to make episodes for several seasons? And I started kind of imagining what certain episodes would be like, because I would imagine it was episodic, not serialized. So I think, okay, well, maybe there's an episode where a girl, gets the flu and she gets really sick, or there's an episode where dad gets shot and he almost dies, and they have to fend for themselves. Or there's an episode where mom and dad are gone, but there's, a bear that comes and then the girls have to actually shoot it. Like I started thinking, okay, I think they could do it
a lot like those.
Yeah. I mean, because that's what else can you do? But then I'm like, can they really do that 200 times? How many bears can attack? How many times can little Susie get the flu? How many times can, Edwards come by and say, I'm all out of smoking tobacco. Can I borrow some? And then they come together and become friends. But Muhammad, what you were explaining is that they go to a place with a town and there are more people. And I'm like, okay, now I get that. Now that
they're not
works.
in the town; they're like just outside the town. But they go. I mean, the kids go to school in the town and stuff like that. So there's interactions in a broader community. Like there's a doctor you see all the time. There's a preacher they see all the time. It's Mr. Edwards. There's a set of people, and then gradually other people get added to this show too. Like they adopt some kid named Albert, and then later on there's 2 other kids which I don't remember where they came from, but they were just suddenly there. But they grow up. Laura gets married to somebody, and it moves on.
Oh wow, actually, they get old.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I think Mary got, I think Mary got married too. I remember she went blind, but I don't remember. I think she got married as well as being blind.
So for that reason, I was very curious about it and I wanted to know more about it, but I was like, but I'm not going to watch 200 episodes to find that out. So I'd rather just ask somebody, and it's a no from me.
Oh, I should have told you. Then it would have been a yes.
I know I was a no last night, and I was kind of on the fence, but I was like, I feel like I got what I wanted. I have curiosity about how they're going to perform this, because it's obviously going to be different than what the first episode was. So I was just curious about it, but I got what I wanted out of it. I felt something. They took me away. If it was on, I might be curious enough. If somebody's watching it, I might be curious enough to say, oh, let's see how they execute season 5, episode 6. Let's see what this show's really about, because clearly this first episode does not tell us what this show is actually going to be about. It's its own thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a no for me. Close though. Got enjoyment. That's it, everybody. That was we actually had a lot more to talk about. Because they covered so much ground.
There was so much time. Though it still could have been a 40-minute episode and it would have been fine. Easily.
Like when there's fire and then suddenly just rain falls, like hard ass rain to knock out a forest fire just like that. I was like, you trying to say that's the power of Jesus again, you guys? Is this going to be your answer to everything? I was waiting
like one of them was sitting on top of the thing praying in the middle of it. But I was waiting to see if that was going to be the pitch that used.
We got to give up. No, our last resort. Let's pray. Okay, well, I shouldn't laugh about that. Anyway, who knows if that's what it is? I was just like, maybe in Kansas, rain just shows up. We should have asked Katie that. Maybe rain just shows up and goes hard.
Puts out all the field fires.
Mm-hmm. So that's it for us, everybody. We hope you've enjoyed this one. If you have a show you'd like us to review, sarcastically or otherwise, in the comments below, just type WTF and the show that you'd like us to review, but also tell us where we can find it. It makes it a lot easier. And then we'll review it. Maybe. What I'm trying to say is this podcast was fun as hell. I mean, heaven.
This podcast was not little, but not a house, but there were prairies.
We're prairie dogging it. Thank you all very much. If anybody knows what that means, we will see you next time. And please always remember what Mr. Michael Kenyon Rosenberg likes to say.
Don't forget to be an organ donor, and don't forget to watch the first of things.
All right. Freeze frame like a prairie dog.
That shitty smile and